Okay, good morning from Vancouver, Canada. Welcome to the webinar, Data Success in Education, How FME Can Help Your Campus. This webinar is presented by Plaid Analytics, and we're joined by colleagues from Hondo College and Safe Software. My name is Andrew Drinkwater. I'm the president of Plaid Analytics, and my colleague Pat Lougheed is our Chief Technology Officer. We're joined by Carolyn Durdella, Dean of Institutional Research and Planning at Hondo College, which is located near Los Angeles, California in the United States. We're also joined by Sienna Emery, who works for Safe Software. Safe is the vendor that makes FME. Next, please. So we imagine today that many of you work in education and that you're familiar with some of the data challenges that exist in the space. Everything from data silos to different systems that don't talk particularly well to one another to an absence of certain systems sometimes. If you're trying to work towards having a strategic enrollment management philosophy at your institution, this can make it very difficult to move forward. So, we help with things like, are your staff comfortable using data to make decisions? Has your institution provided the tools that they need in order to do this? Or, are your people gluing things together using their minds and spreadsheets? We can help connect, transform, and automate to empower your staff to use data. Next, please. Plaid Analytics is based in Vancouver, Canada, and we help educational institutions gain insight from their data. This primarily revolves around data and analytics solutions, business process improvement, and training and workshops. We're going to show you some examples today, mostly from the data and analytics solutions area. In terms of what we're going to talk about today, we've broken it into two major parts. So part one focuses on the automated data pipeline and data warehouse that we built in partnership with Hondo College in California. I should note that this is still in progress, so built is not past tense in this case. And this is the foundation layer for Hondo's strategic enrollment management practices on the campus. So that'll be about the first half of the presentation. And then the second half or so of the presentation will focus on essentially a variety hour or variety 20 minutes, as it were, of different examples that you can use on your campus with FME, how you can leverage your data, integrate it, and connect it. And with that, I will turn it over to Pat to talk about the project that we began with Hondo.
Thanks, Andrew. So it's pretty hard to do strategic enrollment management without having some kind of solid data foundation. Understanding where your institution is and where it wants to go is key to strategic enrollment management. And so part of where we come in is to help establish that data foundation. Today, we're going to be talking about a project that we've been undertaking with Hondo College to really build that strategic enrollment management foundation with a variety of decision support systems, primarily focused on student data, pieces around financial aid, student tracking, enrollment management, how many students are in different courses, how many full-time equivalent students does that generate, those sorts of things. And the project really encompasses three different pieces. First is an automated data pipeline, and this is entirely built within Safe Software's FME that we're going to talk about today. A scalable data warehouse to keep all that data over time and that can grow with Hondo's data needs, and then Tableau dashboards to present that information to stakeholders across the campus. And with that, over to you, Carolyn.
Thank you. So first of all, thank you for including me. So just a little bit about Hondo College. Hondo College is a California community college, and California community colleges are what are known as open access institutions. So essentially we take everybody, right? So anyone who wants to attend our college can apply and will be admitted to our college. Hondo is located just outside the city of Los Angeles in the heart of the San Gabriel Valley. We serve an annual full-time equivalent an annual FTES of roughly 12,000 students, which translates to roughly 20,000 headcount. We provide substantial, what they call career technical education, as well as transfer to four-year universities. And one of the components of our CTE education is what we call incumbent worker training. So this is mostly public safety academies, as well as construction trades, apprentices. We are what is known as a Hispanic Serving Institution, or HSI. And when you remove the incumbent worker training from the student population, our what you would call regular credit student population is approximately 85% Latinx students. We do have a population of Asian students as well, 5 to 7% Asian students, and about 5 to 7% Caucasian students, and then lesser populations of other race ethnicities. Next slide. So we engaged with Plaid to assist us in developing a data warehouse and data visualization so that we can accomplish strategic objectives with respect to enrollment management and student completion. So in California, we have a new funding formula. It's called the Student-Centered Funding Formula. And it's based on the traditional bread and butter of full-time equivalent students, as well as the degree to which you provide access and serve historically underserved populations of students, as well as being rewarded for completion. So students transferring, earning degrees, certificates, et cetera. And then also kind of bonus rewards for students who receive in the US what are known as Pell Grants, right? So more needy students, you receive extra funding, the degree to which you can be successful with those students in getting them to complete. So those are some of our strategic enrollment and management objectives. As the slide indicates, we had a number of challenges in moving forward with what we wanted to do that the Plaid team was really able to help us with. So the first challenge was related to Banner, right? So the data coming out of Banner wasn't really in a format that we could use to make sense of or even easily access. And then in the institutional research office, we're not really SQL people. So like we do know some rudimentary SQL, but in order to get what we needed from Banner, we really needed that expertise and that custom code writing from Plaid. And then we didn't really have a cohesive strategy with our Tableau dashboards. We had some, and they tended to be more ad hoc, but we did have a vision for what we wanted, and we communicated this in our scope of work to the Plaid team. Next slide. So our vision was really to focus on developing insights and calls to action with respect to specific populations of students. So getting them into our college, so access to the college, getting them enrolled, getting them to persist, and then getting them to complete. So we wanted to create dashboards that supported that strategic vision, right? So some of the things we asked Plaid to do was to basically help us develop the FTES component where we could manage operationally our full-time equivalent students, help us manage the head counts of students that we needed to provide access to, and help us to track students in terms of things that we know help them be successful. So academic and progress probation, financial aid, for example, the degree to which we are dispersing aid in a timely format, those types of things. So they assisted us in building an automated data pipeline and a warehouse so that we could have up-to-date data. So that was the other issue we faced in institutional research. We tended to have mostly historical data that we were able to easily manipulate, but this didn't help us operationally. When you're trying to hit an FTES target, you want to know where you are at all times when you're in the process of doing that. And we wanted to reduce the ad hoc nature of queries, right? And move in the direction of the IR office assisting the college with identifying trends in the data and providing insight as to where different programs should focus their efforts in support of these strategic objectives. So And then the other thing that is perhaps most significant is, we have a substantial equity agenda at the college. And what we wanted to do is to ensure that we were targeting resources in the right places to increase or improve completion rates for specific groups of students. So, and make sure that during the pandemic, for example, access was not reduced for those students. Next slide. So the biggest improvements that I think we've achieved working with Plaid is that this automated data pipeline and putting all the data kind of in one place. Also, really the ability to stitch together different types of data, for example. So not only do you have your standard like Oracle tables that you would have in a data warehouse, but we have the ability to add like some Excel tables for data that's kind of stored by other programs in other ways. We can add that into this data warehouse. So it really gives us this increased capacity. And then the other thing I think that's really outstanding for us, that is kind of the last piece that will fall into place a little bit later, is the information privacy aspect of what they're going to be doing for us. So we will have access to various programs based upon their role in the institution. So in the US, we have something called FERPA. It's a Federal Privacy Act. And so it basically states that unless you have a reason to know something about a student, it's part of your regular job duties, you have access to that type of data. But if you don't have a reason to know that, then that data needs to be protected. And so they're going to assist us with managing that a little bit better. And so we're working primarily, as I mentioned, on enrollment management and the student tracking, as well as the financial aid aspects, which is really, really important for our particular population of students. And so having all the information kind of visually in one place, as well as the capability, the functional capability that the team has given us in terms of being able to filter students and, for example, ultimately download a list of students who may not have completed a program component, gives our counselors the opportunity to reach out to those students right away and find out why they haven't completed a counseling appointment, for example, that type of thing. Let's see. I think I touched on all those. So that's next slide. So our next steps are to expand access to the executive team and to the different program staff across the campus. And to, as we use the dashboard, uncover additional metrics that would be of use to us in improving access for our students, as well as completion rates for our students. And then the last thing I would add is what this allows us to do as a college is to refine our strategy in terms of our everyday work. So for example, the visuals of the dashboard and the calls to actions from the dashboard allows us to reprioritize our everyday work activities so that we can better serve our students and ultimately improve our outcomes for those students. So that's what we're really looking forward to going forward.
Great. Thank you very much, Carolyn. If anyone has any questions for Carolyn, in particular on the kind of the high level objectives and the various challenges that Rio Hondo had encountered, please feel free to add those into the chat, and we will make sure that Carolyn gets an opportunity to answer those before the end of the presentation. Okay. So let's talk about the solution a little bit and where FME comes to play in this. So as Carolyn talked about, there's an on-campus Banner database, a variety of spreadsheets to provide data that Banner doesn't provide, and then additionally some external data that needs to come in from various places. In particular, one of the pieces that we wanted to be able to accomplish was a geographic component, being able to look at data around the college and see where are students coming from, how long does it take them to get to campus, where are they being drawn from, do students that are closer to campus take longer to complete, for example, or do they provide more full-time equivalent? Do they take more classes, essentially? And to build all this and bring in data from all of these different places, we used FME to create this data pipeline. And ultimately, what that's doing is feeding into both a data warehouse and also then visualizations and dashboards that are created in Tableau, usable by various members of the college community. Both in the executive and then in the operational day-to-day components that we're also building. So why FME? A couple of reasons. One is it allowed us to connect to all of the various different data sources that Rio Hondo has, both internally and in the external systems that we wanted to connect to. So one example for the geographic data, we were bringing in data from the United States Census Bureau to be able to accurately map where students are. We can also automate data processing, in this case nightly, but also we can use various triggers and automations with FME Server to process data on demand where needed. And then we can also use FME to build the ability to capture data from other folks within the college community. So as an example of this, the executive would like to be able to say, we would like this division to provide this many full-time equivalent students towards the college's overall target. And to break that down, whether that be by fiscal year or by term. And rather than require somebody to understand SQL to put this data into a database table somewhere, we can actually use FME to capture that data, make sure it's got all the components that we need, and then put that into a place where we can later access it for our visualization needs. From a variety of systems that we need to bring in. So much of it comes from the Banner student information system. So pieces like registrations, what programs are students in, what courses are they in, who's putting on those courses, those sorts of components. There's also some data definition pieces that are provided by the California Community College Chancellor's Office. So there's various regulations that Rio Hondo has to utilize, including different grading schemes, and different grades count towards whether a student is successful or not. And these definitions come from the Chancellor's Office and don't necessarily exist within the Banner environment. And so we have various spreadsheets for things like grades, but also other components that may not be well defined in Banner. As mentioned, we've got geographic information such as census address info and college district boundaries. So in the United States and in California in particular, the state is divided up into college districts, of which Rio Hondo is one. So students may be from within the district or without, and then the district is further broken up in different ways. There are trustees to the college district that are elected from different areas of the college district, and so we can even break down into those areas using FME. In future, FME can also be used to connect to virtually any other system. So whether that's a learning management system, human resources, finance, etc. And additionally, FME also provides the capability, again, this is a future possibility, to push to other systems for reporting. So whether that's accreditation, ensuring student athletes meet the requirements of the athletics organization, that sort of thing. All of that can be done with FME. Additionally, as we talked about capturing data from those who aren't quite as tech savvy, And one of the things FME allows us to do is not only to import data into the data warehouse, but also FME takes care of all of the heavy lifting of moving data around to make sure that it's in the right place. Also to see what data is new, what data has changed in Banner since yesterday, and how do we capture that so that we're not overloading, we're not creating a data warehouse that's literally capturing millions and millions of rows each day, even when nothing changes. We can use FME to only give us the changes and track those over time. And all of this can be done with FME Server, running automatically, taking care of things, whether that's daily or on demand. So the results. We have built the automated data pipeline using FME, and it's now running still in a development environment, but we're fairly close to cutting over to production every morning. So every morning it's pulling data out of Banner, out of these various spreadsheets, putting this together, figuring out what's new, capturing that new data, and then putting it all together in a form that's relatively easily queryable, but also can be visualized. And then the Tableau dashboards that go along with this data pipeline are allowing college stakeholders to see and understand their data in new ways. So there's that geographic component, as we mentioned. Carolyn also mentioned being able to see where are we today rather than relying on historical data. So you can see day over day, how are our FTES changing? Is it going in the right direction? Are students dropping courses? Are they picking up new courses? Are we, if we put on a new section, is that generating FTES for us? Another component that is relatively new as part of this project is as Carolyn mentioned, the financial aid, being able to see, okay, how much aid are our students applying for? How much are they getting? Are we getting that to them in a timely manner? So part of the reason to go with FME for a project like this is to be able to design your workflow visually, to be able to actually see how data flows through your data pipeline, and allowing you to inspect the data and debug it as you go. You're not building a stored procedure all in SQL that you can only see the end result and not really what's all the transformations that are happening in the middle. FME really allows for that step-by-step understanding what's happening with your data. Also allows you to annotate different steps in your process so that other people, inevitably there will be somebody that in future will be working on this that's not working on it today. And the annotations and the bookmarks and the visual capabilities of FME will really allow them to understand exactly what the pipeline is doing as everything is getting built. And of course, let FME take care of data comparisons and moving data around and working with your database to get all those components in place. In terms of the capabilities of FME that can really help with the data warehousing piece would be one of the many systems like Banner have data in many different tables. And in order to build something that's useful for reporting and analytics, we really want to bring together many of those different data elements. And something like a feature joiner is great for that. You can also use pieces like a null attribute manager null attribute mapper to make sure that where we shouldn't have null values, we're not going to. Change detectors that can help us understand how data has changed. Sorters and duplicate filters. We know that there's many tables in Banner and many other systems where there might be multiple pieces of data spread over different rows, and really we want to be able to bring that down into a single row for whether that's for a student or for a course. And sorters and duplicate filters can help us with that, as can also in this list aggregators and statistics calculators when we need to take those rows and really add them up into something a little bit higher level. all databases, of course, deal with dates in slightly different ways, just to drive us all a little bit crazy. And so date-time calculators and converters are quite often necessary as well. And then, of course, attribute managers to make sure that we've got all the right components in our before we write the tables to the database. So this is a very stripped down example of something that we might build for a data warehouse to bring together information from various different components in Banner, student registrations, information about a course, information about the grade and the grade definition, what college or division or area of the institution is putting on a course, and level of study, joining that all together, and then building appropriately some dates and times and calculating statistics that ultimately we can then put into our database. One of the pieces that FME provides that we've leveraged to great effect for this project is FME Server. And there are some fantastic use cases of which the data warehousing really kind of fits into a couple of different places here. So we can automate this data integration, this getting data into the data warehouse. We can do all of that with FME Server. Some of the other components that we'll talk a little bit later, application integration. We talked a little bit about self-service data integration and being able to gather data from people who might not be quite as tech savvy or provide them that data. FME Server can help us do that as well. Send emails and notifications. So if something goes wrong with our data pipeline, we can rely on FME to send an email to the folks that can look into that and help get that solved. Self-serve data access. Again, in this particular case, we're working with Tableau to deliver that data, but FME can also do that directly as well. We've got different streams of data. So as we talked about, pulling data from Banner, from spreadsheets, from other external systems that we want to access by APIs like Census Bureau data. And then ultimately, this can all help us scale. If we need to be able to do more or do it faster or process more data in the future, we can do that with FME Server and know that it's going to provide all the capabilities for us. We can also automate the workflows. So we can find some way to trigger a workflow, assemble data from various different places and easily assemble our automations using a visual interface, and ultimately allow us to eliminate much of the manual effort of the complex and repetitive tasks. In this case, we're using a schedule. We're using or we're building our data warehouse tables nightly. Processing it all while everybody is asleep at home in bed and not worrying about it. But there's various other ways that we can also trigger our workflows. So when one of those spreadsheets that we talked about, when those change, we can see when they change and we can run the workflows again immediately rather than waiting for overnight if we wanted to do that. We could also have a special email address that somebody, if it needed to run right now, then we could set that up so that receiving the email would trigger the workflow. And then for integrating with other applications programmatically, we can utilize things like webhooks, external messages from whether it's Amazon or Azure or even on-campus systems that might use something like JMS or WebSocket. And then internally, there's various messaging components that FME can track as well. And when we want to run this workflow, the biggest component that we're using in this is running a workspace. And rather than have one workspace that covers our entire data pipeline, it's modularized. Each component it is broken down into a very specific piece that does a very specific thing. And so our automations here are actually running a whole series of workspaces. We can also merge, log, and filter various messages sent throughout our automation. So if a particular message looks one way, we could run one more workspace. If it looks another way, we could run a different workspace. We could send emails. Again, this is one we're using to great effect with this project, so that if something does go wrong, somebody knows about it immediately. Or similarly, to triggers, we can send an outgoing message using any of a variety of topics. We can put a file in a specific place, or we can use those internal notifications as well. Finally, one of the components we talked about was capturing data from our less tech-savvy users. And for this, we leverage FME Server Apps. So these allow us to create an easy-to-use interface for non-FME users to run workspaces. This essentially is go to a web page, fill in the information required if there's any, and then immediately do something with that data, with that information. And we can fully customize this as well. We can do colors, we can do logos, we can do banners, and crucially, we can do instructions. We can provide information and documentation right there in the web page. Here's what we need you to do. Here's the information that we need. Please put it in this way, and then we'll take care of everything from there. And there's a second kind of application as well. It's called a gallery application, so that when you have multiple different workspaces, you can provide a landing page, and people can select the appropriate gallery app, or sorry, the appropriate server app that they want to run. Does anybody have any questions? Feel free to unmute yourself and ask that way, or drop it in the chat, or there will, of course, be other opportunities a little bit later on in the presentation to tackle questions as well. One piece we're going to do throughout is just try and get a sense of whether anybody out there in the audience would like to see a more focused webinar on this and various other topics that we're going to talk about. So I've launched the first poll just asking about data warehousing in particular, but as we go through, others will pop up. I'll leave that up for another 30 seconds or so. In the meantime, there's a couple of other pieces that we are going to talk about over the next 20 minutes. And we'll touch a little bit on combining on-campus SIS with cloud LMS data. This will apply to basically any combination of on-campus and cloud or API-based data systems rather than these two specific. We're also going to talk about alumni economic impact and a particular project that we did that combines spatial and geospatial data to look at institutional alumni and how much they earn, how FME can help us enable and improve our government reporting processes, how we can use FME to create a portal that would allow us to provide open data from our institution out into the world. And we'll talk a little bit about FME's education subscription. Okay. All right. So let's talk about both how we can utilize FME to get different systems that may or may not talk to one another, talking together more effectively. So one thing many institutions are now seeing is systems that use APIs for communication and/or that live in the cloud. There's a fair amount of overlap. Most cloud-based systems use APIs, but not all clouds use APIs, and not all API systems use cloud. But for our purposes here, we're basically talking anything that we need to communicate with by an API. Moving data to and from these systems requires tools that can speak multiple data formats and multiple data schemas. Each system will have its own format that it requires and data looking a particular way. Where FME can help us is really to connect those different tools that we need to use by reading data from one system, transforming the format and data required by the other system, and then ultimately writing that. We can do that on a schedule, or we can even trigger that based on changes in either system. So as one example, if we wanted to connect an on-campus database-based student information system, so this might be a Banner or a PeopleSoft or myriad other systems, Colleague, PowerSchool, what have you, with something that's cloud hosted and API-based, in this case, a learning management system. So there's various information that has to go between these two systems. So course registrations, who our instructors are, what courses we're mounting, and many LMSs have ways of bringing this data in bulk, but then it has to be scheduled. You have to create CSVs. You have to move those CSVs into the appropriate place and then import them. Part of what we can do with FME is automate that process and make it much closer to real time as changes in registrations are happening, or as changes in instructional assignments are happening. We can move that data over to our learning management system very, very quickly. And by reading data from the relevant tables in the SIS, formatting messages in the format required for the learning management systems API, and then calling the appropriate API function. Going the other way, we can similarly pull data out of the API, and many APIs, in the interest of not sending gobs and gobs of data across what's often a web service connection, require you to loop through data when appropriate. So if there's 10,000 records that have to be retrieved, it may bulk these up into groups of 100 or 1,000, requiring you to make multiple calls saying, I want the next batch now, or even getting them one at a time. And FME can take care of all of that looping where it's necessary for us, transforming that data to the format required by the SIS, and then writing the data to the appropriate spots so the SIS can pick up that new information. Many LMSs or other API-based data sources also have the ability to send data immediately to FME via something called webhooks or other messaging systems, which would allow FME to, again, process that data in real time to get it back into our SIS. So for example, if our LMS is where our instructors put in final grades, we can, rather than requiring them to enter that data into the LMS and then separately enter it into the SIS, we could pull that information over as it's entered. All right, Andrew, Alumni, I'm going to launch that poll. And while that's happening, over to you for Alumni impact, economic impact.
All right, thanks, Pat. So the next example in our variety hour here is around alumni economic impact. So the basic idea of the economic impact of university or college alumni is that those who graduate from these institutions earn more money than a student who graduated just from high school, as an example. So the differential between the earnings of a high school graduate and a university or college graduate is what's known as the educated workforce premium. This ultimately feeds into a form of the gross domestic product in terms of the end of the chain. So how do we use a tool like FME to help us with this? We want to bring together a number of different data sources. So what you see on the left in the orange color there is data that my institution collects. So how many graduates are there can come from my student information system, such as Banner or PeopleSoft or Workday or whatever. We may also have records of where our alumni or graduates are living or working. Most institutions do this via survey, but some have really accurate alumni reporting systems that would have the same information. So whichever one is most accurate for your purposes is a great place to start. In the middle part, in the gray color there, is information that's provided by the government. So in this case, we're talking Statistics Canada, but there's equivalents from most governments around the world to this kind of information. So we can get information from the Canadian Census on populations of particular areas. We can also get information on earnings by credential completed, which is how we tie this back to our institutional data. Did somebody complete a bachelor's degree or a master's or doctoral degree? And potentially, if we want to get really detailed, in what discipline did they complete these? We also have geographic information. So in the bottom block there, we call this regions. And the Canadian census is divided into a number of different regions. We range from a very high level, the country of Canada, to a little bit more detailed, the provinces and territories. There's 13 of them in Canada, to much more granular. So economic regions and census dissemination areas are large parts of provinces or territories, but there's a number of them within most of the provinces or territories. Census metropolitan areas are essentially cities. So there's lots of those within a particular area. There are a number of other ways that you could also look at census data, but for the purpose of this project, these three were sufficient for the kinds of questions we were trying to answer. We then use FME to help us bring all this information together and ultimately calculate the combined total of the educated workforce premium across all of our graduates in all the places that they happen to be living or working in the country. Next slide, please. So at the end, what we came up with here was a visualization in Tableau. Now, this is more interactive, but we're showing you the static form for now. And I should note that all these numbers are entirely fake. So what we ended up doing was building a workflow where the user could select which city or census metropolitan area their institution happens to be located in. So for example, we picked Prince George, and we picked that for this demo because it's roughly speaking the geographic center of British Columbia. And we said basically that some proportion of our graduates are living and working in Prince George, and some proportion of them are living in other places in BC that you can see color coded there. Some are in Alberta or Ontario, and the remainder are the rest of Canada. So this is currently slanted a little bit towards graduates from British Columbia. If you are based in, say, Ontario, you might want to have Quebec and some of the maritime provinces and Manitoba listed as separate provinces. All of this is possible within FME. So it's really a question of how you want to put together your different regions and what makes sense for your audience. But at the end of the day, what we can calculate is that there is a net economic impact from our graduates relative to them just being a high school graduate of something on the order of $70 million spread across Canada in different ways. So some of the things that we did with the workflow that ultimately created this was I mentioned we combined these different data sources together, both public data from Statistics Canada and internal data for our university. We also did some interesting things. So you may notice that Prince George is separate in the purple color there from the rest of its surrounding BC interior Kootenay region. So we were able to split out the specific city that has the majority of graduates, say, from its surrounding region. And this would allow us to better isolate localized economic impacts so that our institution could perhaps make a case to the government to say, here's the kind of impact we're having in the city, and this is why we want to make some changes as we go forward, for example. We also did a number of other interesting things. So this ultimately built upon what's called the Sudmant method. So Walter Sudmant is the now retired planning and institutional research director at the University of British Columbia in Vancouver. And he pioneered a method that essentially looks at not quite lifetime, a full career, 40 years worth of earnings of particular graduates. And it's discounted net of costs. And so essentially we get an apples to apples comparison between a high school graduate and a university or college graduate in order to inform this analysis. And FME helps us scale out the earnings across the whole career. It takes into account, say, how much it costs to attend a university or college in terms of tuition costs, as well as the cost of the institution where government funding may subsidize a student, those kind of things. So we're doing a very accurate kind of apples to apples comparison here. And FME helps us build this out in a way that's scalable and in a way that we can customize it depending on which institution wants to look at it. So this was a really fun use case for FME because it's something different than what I had worked on previously. And so it's a really neat way to look at how an institution could have an impact on many communities across the country. Next slide, please. Oh, poll, please, and then slide. Okay, so that was a very quick overview of a project that took a couple of months to put together in a really meaningful way. So if people are interested in learning more, we'll put on another webinar about it. And thank you for your votes. All right, so next up in terms of our examples is to talk about government reporting. And so this example relates to a couple of different levels of government that happen. So what we see on the left are institutions. And there are many publicly funded institutions in British Columbia, Canada. Almost all of them submit to the provincial government's central data warehouse. So this is the middle block on the screen. On the right-hand side on the screen, every institution in Canada is required to submit to the federal government's post-secondary student information system, which is run by Statistics Canada. In the case of the institutions in British Columbia that submit to the central data warehouse, the provincial government handles the federal submission on behalf of all the institutions. So this is the process that we're talking about here. We have many institutions, they submit to the provincial government then makes a single submission to the federal government on their behalf. And so we wanted to look at this process in a little more detail. Next, please. So each institution is required to submit to the province a series of tables. This is the record layout for a single table called course. It requires information like the institution's code, obviously, what the course title was, the description, the credit value, and so on. And there's a number of other pages that go with this, but you get the basic idea. One more click. On the right-hand side, however, we notice that this set of definitions also highlights particular instances where this submission ends up in PSIS, or the federal government's post-secondary student information system. So we can see in that second row in our table, element IC 3000, for example, or on the bottom table, we see IC 3090. These feed into the federal submission. So next, please. This is the data definitions for the federal submission. So you may notice on the left-hand side, one more click, please, that there are element numbers similar to what we saw previously. So IC 3090 was course credits as an example. Next, please. So FME can help us. Next. Oh, okay, that's fine. FME can help us in a number of different ways with this submission. So what we see here is a very simple workflow that helps us capture the course-related information. What we see on the left-hand pane for institutional data is that we're connecting to our Banner student information system, and we're pulling in information on course sections, course offerings, and terms. So fairly simple information. We're joining them together in a number of different ways. What we can see in the middle block is our provincial submission. So the top channel that you see on there submits the course section level information, and the bottom channel submits the higher level course information. What we're doing within this workflow is a number of different things. So for the most part, we're renaming Banner fields to match what's required by the provincial government in that middle block. So we're using an attribute manager just to tell it that this field name in Banner equals this field name according to the provincial government. And then we write that to a database or submit it to the provincial government as appropriate. What we see for the federal submission on the right-hand side is we actually start with the provincial submission and we change the format a little bit. So as we did previously, we use an attribute manager to rename a number of different things. We're then also using the string pattern in FME, and this allows us to say, to match that record layout we saw previously. So the federal government requires a single line of plain text submission per course in this case. So each field is allocated a certain number of characters within a 200 character string. And so we use the string pattern for every field that's relevant, or we could make a calculation that would do that in a single step as well, but sticking with the no code approach, we'd use string pattern. And this allows us to create a single string for our submission. And we then concatenate all those values together and output it to a flat file that we submit to Statistics Canada. Next, please. So with this, I will turn it over to Pat and we'll display one more poll. And thank you all very much.
Great, thank you. One other massive advantage of being able to use something like FME is to be able to do lots of data validation on our external reporting before it ever makes it to the government or other organization, which in turn needs to do their own validation. We know one of the components that can make this process much longer is the validation process and having that done by the government organization, and then coming back and saying, well, these records didn't match. We can utilize FME to do much more of that upfront. The other example that we wanted to talk about is open data. So one of the things we're seeing more and more are calls for institutions to be more open with their data. Some examples of places where we might have less sensitive data that others may want to be able to access and ultimately be able to use, whether to provide kind of value-added applications of their own, are pieces like perhaps a course schedule, including how many enrollments are in different courses, so where there might be an ability for a student to pick up an additional course. Building and geographic information, what are the buildings on campus, what are the rooms, how does that correspond to the larger community, and various other components like that. So with FME, we can make data available much more proactively, and there's some abilities here that really allow us to make that data easier for others to consume. So using FME, we can provide data at the click of a button in different formats such as CSV, Excel, XML, JSON, or for spatial data files, shape files, KML, GeoJSON, various other formats. We can also allow users to filter data based on their needs. So maybe for course scheduling, we make 10 years of data available, but somebody, for their own purposes, they really only care about the current registration cycle, only the current term of data. We can make that very easy to do. Or maybe they only care about courses in a particular discipline. Again, very easy to do. For spatial data, we can also allow users to select their preferred projection, whether this is a traditional Latin long, or here in British Columbia, the government uses a very particular projection that provides additional accuracy within BC, but is less accurate without, and we could utilize that one, that projection instead. Some other advantages, we can allow users to access data either through a web interface. We can give them that web page if they just want to download once. But we can also leverage FME to do this through programmatic means, essentially allowing users to call a workspace and get the output directly through programmatic means using the API. We can pull our data from various source systems of any kind. So as we talked about with Rio Hondo, whether it's a Banner student information system database or our facilities pieces are kept in their own geographic database, spreadsheets, what have you, we can bring that all together with FME. For more complex open data requirements, you can integrate with portal providers that provide specific open data portals such as CCAN, which is used locally by the Government of Canada, the City of Surrey, various others around here, and across the world utilize CCAN for their open data portals. And of course, with FME, utilizing all the various other pieces that we've talked about, you can update data automatically and frequently. So you could provide new open data hourly or on demand. All of that can be done with FME. So let's talk about the education subscription. So one of the things that SAFE has done over the last, in particular the last year, to really make FME that much more fantastic within an education environment is to provide an education subscription. So this is an all-you-can-eat model where FME Desktop and FME Server can be utilized in an unlimited manner across the institution. So you get more FME at a lower price. As a subscription model, this becomes an operating expenditure rather than capital. Standing up new projects, a new server, or utilizing desktop in another department no longer requires purchasing new licenses. All of that can be taken care of within the all-you-can-eat model. And this is done on a number of students basis. So the pricing above is for any use in Canada. I neglected to update the date there, so this is actually current pricing. But if you require pricing for use in a different country, please feel free to reach out to Plaid or to us directly, and Sienna has just posted in the chat the link to more information on SAFE's website about the education subscription. And as mentioned, the usage under the subscription license here is unlimited. So you get full use of server, full use of desktop anywhere you need within your institution. All right, so thank you very much for joining us for our variety hour. If you want to book a discovery session, an opportunity for us to have a conversation about your specific use case and how FME can help your institution specifically, we are quite happy to do that. And you can do that either through the website at the link below, or if you'd like us to reach out, please feel free to respond to the poll that has just launched. And as we move towards putting on the webinars that we talked about here, that would dive in with more detail on specific topics that we talked about here, please feel free to sign up for our mailing list to find out about future webinars as we put those on and schedule them. With that, thank you very much for your time. If you do have any questions, we will be around for a bit. As mentioned, please feel free to drop those in the chat, or if you want to ask by audio, we can certainly do that as well. Thank you.
For those still on the line, the recording for this session will be available in about 24 hours. Please feel free to share it with your colleagues. We'd really appreciate it. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. Have a great day.